Welcome back to The Stream. Today, we will be discussing artificial intelligence within the news industry and navigating the ethical implications of it. Tune in for an exciting discussion. I am Anelise Borges, and this is The Stream. Well, thank you, AI Anelise. Artificial intelligence is set to revolutionize our world and become faster and better than us at many things. Deepfakes and generative models have already had an explosive impact on journalism. The question is, can the news industry survive it? To help us answer that and more, we have joining us today Joe Amditis, Associate Director at the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair University, Glen Mulcahy, AI and media trainer, currently consultant for several major media networks on AI, and Jana El Messelmani, a producer, filmmaker, and researcher in digital humanities and societies. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for being part of the stream. I'm very, very intrigued by this conversation, obviously. And Glen, I would like to start with you with an overview, if you don't mind, because you've been helping several major outlets navigate these uncharted AI waters. Can you tell us, where do things stand as we speak today? Is everyone experimenting, testing AI to a certain extent? How is that going?
I think we're in a really interesting situation in a lot of the big media organizations, Annalise. I think it's down to a kind of a polarization. I think a lot of staff, because of the accessibility, a lot of the AI tools are on the market, are experimenting privately. I think most of the big organizations I've dealt with, at least, are taking a much more pragmatic and cautious approach. So many are putting energy into to develop a kind of an AI ethics statement and a set of guidelines for staff to try and make sure that they work within the parameters that are established as acceptable. So it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition. It's also fair to say that as soon as you publish your AI ethics statement, there's a bloody good chance that you're going to have to revisit it within just a couple of months, because the AI evolution is happening so fast that it is very, very hard to get on top of it.
And we've been talking about how AI is going really fast in pretty much all sectors. So, Joe, from what you've been seeing and analyzing, what specific new AI tool or innovation has caught your attention lately? Maybe give us a positive highlight, if you will, and something that is worrying you as well.
Well, I think I appreciate the question, and I do think that that is correct, that there are a lot of evolutions happening very quickly. I think the thing that people need to focus on, especially organizations of the small to medium size, is not even so much generative AI, but even starting with basic automation, if this, then that, sort of trigger and response automation. And I think it really comes down to the adoption of these tools will be best if the process and the operations of an organization are already solid. These tools were really never meant to be all-encompassing and integrated into everything that we do at an organization, and they're much better served as a layer, as an additional feature or a tool. And I think that once these tools sort of start to fade into the background, the dust settles, the hype goes down a little bit, we'll start to see the evolution and the maturation of their use in organizations and in companies in a much more balanced and reasonable way. One thing that's been sticking out to me is just, simple tools that work only with the data that you give it. So, for instance, Google's Notebook LM flat out refuses to give any responses that are not based in the source material that you upload to it. And I think that is where you'll see a lot of growth and development and actual useful applications, instead of sort of the, anything that has the word AI in it is just now, oh, that's the new thing we have to do.
Very, very important points. And we're going to talk about some of them in length during the show. But Jana, I want to get your reaction here in terms of what you're observing right now. What aspects of AI are you starting to pay attention to right now? Because in your opinion, they may actually revolutionize the news industry.
Definitely, AI has been transforming the way we produce news. And what is really important now is data analysis. So I've seen many platforms or many news outlets that have been using data analysis in covering major events. And I think it's transforming hours into minutes, days into also hours of working. So it's giving many useful tools to the journalists to sift through vast amount of data, and I think this is
it's already
like this changing.
It's already revolutionizing our sector, isn't it? It's totally taking out that tedious part of the work, I would say. But when we think about AI in news these days, at least, what most people may actually imagine is deepfakes and misinformation. Journalist Adam Mayambala posted this about this topic. He said research shows that nearly 90% of people struggle to distinguish between a deepfake and a real video, with even AI detection tools failing to spot the difference on multiple occasions, even though that Anelise AI that started the show might not be perfect yet. There is quite a lot of very impressive advancements in this area, at least. Glen, how would you say news organizations should be integrating this technology and the multiple aspects of it without damaging that holy grail of this relationship, the relationship between the news organization and the viewer or the reader, that is, of course, trust?
Yeah, the trust definitely is paramount, I think, for every news organization. So in a time of potential massive eruption in deepfakes, I think trust is the one thing that we have to hold dearest above all else. I mean, there are lots of AI applications that don't necessarily come on screen or straight into the editorial output side of things, like transcription, translation tools, auto captioning for accessibility. And there's a huge suite of research tools which you can use behind the scenes, so to speak. For instance, if you take an app like PimEyes, that unlike normal reverse image search, this will actually identify a face in a photograph and then track that face in every context on the internet. I mean, there are tools like that that are transforming journalism and research, and OSINT research in particular, massively. And exactly as you said, I mean, saving hours for the average day for a journalist. I think the key thing is to know the checks and balances for what's acceptable in the organization before you hit publish. And then ultimately, full disclosure that you say, if you've used AI, say it up front so that the audience knows what to expect, and you can listen to the feedback if people appreciate that or whether they have concerns.
That's a very interesting take. Joe, what is your view on this? Is it important for news outlets to be pulling the curtains and showing people how they're going about uncovering certain data, treating certain data? Is that paramount here in keeping trust?
I think generally speaking, yes, that is very important. But I think what a lot of folks hear or think of when they think of disclosure statements, or at least from a cynical perspective, it oftentimes feels like the AI disclosure, language on the website is serving more as a CYA or an accountability sink, if you will. And I think if we're going to pull the curtain back, we absolutely should do that. We should, for instance, we should have all transparency on things like who writes the headlines, because oftentimes, especially for op-ed journalists or opinion journalists, they're not the ones writing the headlines. So I think there are many layers within the journalism, and specifically not just the reporting, but the publishing side and the back office side of journalism that we can, in fact, pull back the curtain. But I think if you are just putting an AI disclosure statement at the bottom of an article that you publish, I think a lot of times the public can see that as a thing that reduces trust in many ways, because studies show that when people know that AI was involved in making something, that trust and respect sort of goes down. And so if you are going to pull back that curtain, let's do it in all areas or as many areas as possible. I don't think we want to get into a situation where half of the page on the article is just as a breakdown of all the different filters, the different presets in Lightroom, the different prompts that you use to format the text, or what images, and so forth and so forth. I think it's very good to have an AI ethics and disclosure policy, but I think you have to go further than that and not just check the box, but actually go into and engage with your community and your audience and say, look, this is how these tools are used. They are just tools. But at the end of the day, as journalists, the whole point is that what you put out into the public, you have to be able to stand by and defend. And whether you get that information from a freelancer, a staff writer, a producer, or one of these tools, I think it's important to be able to stand there and have the buck stop at the publication, so that regardless of what tools you used, the people can trust that if it comes out from you, then you stand by it and you can defend it.
There is a major issue here that we've been discussing As of late, when it comes to AI, the issue of biases, it's also something that we talk a lot about in media, obviously. I want to share this TED Talk by computer science student Sadhana Lola and then get you guys to react to it. Take a look.
So when you and I think of bias, we're often thinking about human bias, which is when we are prejudiced towards a group of individuals or a system of beliefs. But bias in AI, even though it may propagate human biases, is completely different because it is quantifiable. We can assign a number to this, and more importantly, using this type of analysis, we can mitigate algorithmic bias. And that's because algorithmic bias fundamentally results because of imbalances in data that are used to train artificial intelligence models. So here's an example, an oversimplified one, of a data distribution that we might use to train an AI system. There are peaks in this distribution, so areas of high data, and there are areas of lower representation, places where we don't have a lot of data. When we're training models that involve human data, the data that is at the peaks of this distribution tends to come from, exactly as we just saw, white, Western men. And data that comes from the underrepresented regions of this type of data set comes from women and people of color.
Glen, Sadhana is obviously very, very bright there, and I find that fascinating. The danger of any open harvesting model is obviously copyright, but also the bias that is inherent to the source that this model is using to learn from. How are news organizations currently addressing that?
Well, it's an interesting one, actually, because I won't name check them, but two of the organizations that I've been dealing with have decided to go for a closed learning model based on their own data only. So as opposed to data harvesting just random content and creating a massive large language model, what they're actually doing is training internal models. So using the technology, but feeding their own data sets in to customize it so that they can stand over the quality of the data that's going in. The other thing I would say that I think is interesting is you can actually, for instance, in ChatGPT, ask it to identify potential bias in an article, and it will, intelligent though it may be, actually throw up red flags for when it can detect it. So it's an interesting one of turning it back on itself.
That is, it's intelligent, but not as smart so that it could lie. You also mentioned, when we chatted before the show, you also mentioned a very interesting example where you asked a question about a very contentious issue about Gaza to a model, and you asked it in Arabic and in English, and you had very different answers. Can you share that story, that example with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is a classic case study, again, of the nature of the data inputs that are going in and whether language alone can actually have a kind of an innate bias on it. So there was a question asking about a statement in relation to Gaza, and the English language response came back with a very pro-Western, classic American positioning on it, and yet the Arabic answer came back that was clearly very pro-Palestinian. And in the classroom in particular, I think it actually left most people quite shocked that it could be so radically different and so juxtaposed without any nuance. Even the phraseology in the English language response would cause concern because of the nature of the bias of it as well. So a very visceral example of how bias can, creep into the kind of newsroom environment.
Joe, your take here on the biases of these models that we are seeing emerge and how newsrooms should work to mitigate these biases and ensure fair representation.
But that's a great example, and I was going to use a similar one. But I think even with what Glen said about the news organizations training on their own data, as if that's some kind of safeguard against this, and we know very well that media outlets have their own biases embedded in their coverage, whether it's the source diversity and the audits that show that they overwhelmingly interview white men, straight men, Western men, or it's the bias towards things like institutional legitimacy or coherence or deference to, or sort of Chevron deference, if you will, towards the institutions, especially the intelligence communities, or the allies or partners of U.S. imperialism. And so whether those biases are coming from the training model, the training data themselves, or they're coming from the news organizations, again, I think it comes back to this idea that we need to hold ourselves accountable, and we need to investigate internally our own institutional and organizational and individual biases, and make sure that when we put something out, whether it is something that we've derived from these bots or if it's something that's coming from inside the house, so to speak, that we are putting those kind of checks and that we're involving many, many voices and perspectives on these issues so that they are reflected in the output that we have. I mean, just this panel alone, there's 2 white dudes on here. So
I was just going to say that. And you know what? We tend to be much more inclusive here in the stream. I must say.
I know. And I didn't mean that as a call out to you.
we tend to be very mindful of that, especially with gender representation. But it turns out that you guys had some pretty interesting things to say, so we were forced to invite you. I want to ask about some other ethical implications as we're kind of dissecting this here, because we keep talking about the impact on our democratic models. I mean, with newsrooms already adopting AI models to predict and analyze data during elections, for example, the dangers of AI and deepfakes on democracies cannot be understated. The 2024 London mayoral election was an example of that. ZTO recently released a documentary, The Fake Mayor, that addresses this issue. Take a look.
Is disinformation new? No. Is manipulating the photographic record new? No. But what is new is who can do it. We have reduced barriers to entry. And when you lower that barrier to entry, your threat vector just went through the roof.
Now, in 2016, we saw what happened with the Cambridge Analytica in relation to the referendum, Facebook and the US presidentials. In my view, that is analog compared to what AI can do, what deepfake can do.
Your vote makes a difference in November, not this Tuesday.
Now that sounds like a plea from Joe Biden, except that it isn't.
At a time when they should be invested in AI to try and root out deepfake, they're not doing so.
Joe, so that was obviously around the episode where they cloned the mayors. I don't even know if that is a term, but let's, for the purposes of this conversation, they put out this statement that sounded a lot like the mayor, but it wasn't the mayor. And I was, to be honest, I was expecting a lot of that kind of situations, similar situations, to come out of the US elections. And at least from here, we didn't see it that much. Why would you say deepfakes were not that popular, I would say, in this particular race to the White House?
Well, I'd say in one part because it's just not necessary to mislead people in most cases. The technology is, as that documentary from ZTO pointed out, much easier to access. It used to, I mean, these things are not new. They're not novel issues that we're dealing with: photo and video manipulation, audio fakes, and clones. Yes, that is the right word, or the right parlance for these days. But in the past, it took years or months at least of training and practice and education on how to use the various tools that allow you to manipulate these pieces of media. Now it takes a couple dollars, a phone, and some spare time, and maybe some malicious or nefarious intent. But ultimately, the reality is it's just not necessary to mislead people. You don't need to come up with these elaborate schemes to tell people lies. You can just say it, and in many cases,
especially
people
in a race
will believe it. They're not looking for that. They're looking to confirm their own biases anyway. So all you have to do is sort of give them that red meat that they're looking for in the first place, and they'll run with it. It's not necessary.
I was going to say, especially in a race where Donald Trump is running. I mean, there's so much there already I'm talking about the president-elect of the United States. Looking ahead, I would like to take a moment now, as we're nearing the end of the show, to talk about how do we go about experimenting again with these tools in a controlled fashion. Some say, for example, that AI should be regulated. Take a look.
91% of people agree that we should carefully manage AI. So let's make that happen. We need to come together to build a global organization, something like an international agency for AI that is global, nonprofit, and neutral. It is critical that we have both governance and research as part of it. It's a very big ask, but I'm pretty confident that we can get there because I think we actually have global support for this. Our future depends on it.
Joe was smiling at this statement. But before I go to you, Joe, I want to have Jana's take on this, on the future. Should there be a body that oversees the usage of AI also in news, in your opinion?
I think it's now unrealistic to put like some strategy to regulate the use of AI or the ethical keynotes of using AI. I would definitely agree with Joe about what he said regarding the deepfakes. I think it has been used before in the election, but I think now deepfakes are from old days. There are new advanced way of manipulating the audience. There are propaganda dissemination. There are organization using a big LLM and integrated in ChatGPT to just get a viewpoint. I think this also would align with what Glenn has mentioned before regarding the difference between if you ask ChatGPT in English or in Arabic, but also in English, if you ask ChatGPT, like give me the New York Times point of view, it will differ from another organization. So I think there are huge ways to manipulate the audience other than deepfakes as well.
Huge potential to manipulate the audience. That is very scary. I mean, Joe, I believe it was you that quoted Stephen Fry in our chat before the show. Fry also spoke about this $100 billion plan with a 70% risk of killing us all, AI. Should we be optimistic about the future of AI, particularly in news?
I think ultimately the future of any technology, especially in the current climate, is tied to the future of capitalism and the way that these markets operate. I think there wouldn't be nearly as many complaints about copyright and theft of content if these tools were created with public value and public benefit in mind, but they're not. They're created to amass and extract a surplus value for a small group of capitalists. And I think with regard to any kind of regulations, I completely agree we need them. I think there should be consumer and creative protections. I don't think that it should be a labyrinthian maze to go turn off the AI training and scraping for every social media platform retroactively. And I think that the regulatory challenge, of course, especially at a global scale, is going to be, I mean, we've had mass consensus that Palestinian statehood should be a thing, but there are a few detractors that prevent it from going forward. So global or mass appeal does not necessarily result in global or mass enforcement. So we need consumer protections, we need creative protections, we need to wrest back control of the value of these and to localize the externalities and the impacts of them to the people who are creating them. And we need to reorient the way that we develop technology to benefit the members of the public and the people who create the value, and not just allow it to be hoarded and sequestered into a small group of international capital or capitalists.
Which is happening right now. So no, we should not be optimistic. I mean, Glenn,
sorry.
Glenn, where do you see this going? What do you think is going to happen to AI and to journalism?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm going to circle back to two comments that you've said already. The first one is about how, by perception, AI didn't seem to play as much of a role in the US election, perhaps as the expectation. Certainly, that would have been my initial take. But I think the one thing that has been factored in a lot is that there were a huge amount of closed community groups like Telegram, particularly being used by the Republican Party to reach their voter base, that wouldn't have necessarily been directly within the public line of sight. And we don't know, because we're not in there, we don't know whether there was a lot of Cambridge Analytica style kind of messaging being pushed to people to trigger them. So that's the first thing to factor in. We don't know whether this was the AI election we anticipated or not, because not all of it was in the public domain. Second thing is, the outcome of the US election with Trump taking power again is basically going to give a carte blanche to AI in the US, with Elon Musk effectively, by the looks of it at least, but taking up a government position. I fully expect that he will lobby to try and actually deregulate, if that's even possible, the AI development. So there's a lot of very, very big vested billion-dollar companies in the US who will benefit from that. So to come to your question, I'm a little bit worried about it. You said it at the very top of the show, Anelise, the idea that trust is probably our only USP going forward. In a time when people's behaviors are changing, people are leaning away from traditional media to get their news sources, and sometimes looking to influencers who, with the best of respect, can be very easily manipulated if there's enough coin in the deal. I think that idea of being a single point where you can go and get verified information, factually accurate, and, you know, challengeable so that there's accountability in it as well. I think that will be our USP going forward.
And hopefully we can stick to that and continue to produce quality journalism in the meantime. Thank you so, so much, Glen, Joe, and Jana, for your time. Thank you for being part of the stream today. And thank you all for tuning in. If you have a comment about our show, you can talk to us on social media. Use the hashtag or the handle AJStream, and we will look into your feedback and suggestions. Take care, and I'll see you soon.